Let's circle back.
Sure.
Circle back. We're gonna circle back to the COVID lockdowns and this business and the economy, because we have this story that I find particularly interesting. Now, in the previous segment, we were talking about a business that accrued $400,000 in fines over violating these COVID restrictions. Now, with the vaccine mandates that are popping up, well, for the most with private businesses, and now in New York from a public place, we got this story from Timcast.com. Boston's Democrat mayor compares vaccine passports to papers required during slavery and Jim Crow.
Interesting.
That's bold. Democrat Boston Mayor Kim Janey has compared vaccine passports to the papers required slavery and Jim Crow. The first black person to serve as mayor of the city also compared vaccine passports to demands that former President Obama show his birth certificate during the birtherism scandal. I mean, this is. I agree. I'm not gonna pretend to know about these horrible things throughout history, but what I say I agree is that it is an overbearing demand from the state on regular people to implement these things to the extent that you can't go to a store, you can't go to a bar, you can't go to a music venue or something. Now in New York, I don't think they're saying. I think you can go to stores still. They're saying indoor activities, but as far as I'm concerned, if you mandate a vaccine for one thing, let's say they were like, you need a vaccine to go to the hot dog stand on 7th Street. You've mandated vaccines. It's over. As far as I'm concerned, because you've hit at a core function for many people. I don't care who or how many. So when they say if you want to go out to eat, you need to have your vaccine and vaccine card. New York has mandated vaccines. Period. There's no other reason to argue about it. That's wrong. We saw that with the Offspring drummer Pete. I think Pete Parada's his name. He's got Guillain-Barré syndrome. Is
right.
That?
I think so. Yeah.
And so he couldn't get it. He couldn't get the vaccine, and now he's kicked out of the band. Is that what we're going to create? We're going to create this medical segregation
Is he actually kicked out of the band?
Yes.
That's insanity.
Yeah.
What?
He went to the doctor. He had a young age. He developed Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is it's an extremely rare side effect for people when they get some vaccines, and it emerges for other reasons too, but it can be a side effect. It is a side effect of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and there are many doctors who advise against getting the vaccine if you have this syndrome, which he did. Out of the band. You're gone.
It's insanity.
No,
Isn't that don't we have violations of like the Americans with Disabilities Act? Can't we be like, if you're experiencing this and it is limiting to you, like we protect you in that regard?
Well, I think at this point it becomes very clear that it's all about having you bend the knee, if anyone was unaware. If a person is disabled and has a very good medical reason for not getting vaccinated, and your response is to kick them out because they haven't taken your preferred route for handling this situation, it's obvious that what you're interested in is submission. It's not about public health.
Let me pull up the story we have from the Daily Mail. More than half of unvaccinated Americans believe COVID-19 shots are more dangerous than the virus itself, poll finds. Over half of unvaccinated Americans, 53%, believe that COVID-19 vaccines pose a higher health risk than the virus itself. The view is especially prominent among Americans who say they're definitely not getting the vaccine, with 75% believing the vaccine is more dangerous. In fact, the virus is far more dangerous. Out of 243,000 Americans who died of COVID since January 2021, only 1,300 have been unvaccinated. Still, the Indian Delta variant is persuading some to get their shots, with 22% of unvaccinated respondents saying the variant was a vaccination motivator. I don't know the full percentage numbers, but yeah, the virus is far more dangerous.
Well, you said died from COVID, right? You read that phrase, from COVID?
Died of COVID.
Of COVID. How many people have died of COVID?
Let's see. Out of 243,000 Americans who have died since January 2021, only 1,300 have been unvaccinated.
So
wait, what?
200?
That's not correct.
I don't know these numbers, but they're saying that 230,000 people died of COVID. I've seen reports that people had COVID in their system and died of a motorcycle accident or some other thing with COVID. They died with COVID, not necessarily of COVID. But there was
that's wrong. That's wrong. They wrote the story wrong. The story, it's they did it wrong. Out of 243,000 COVID deaths, later on they fix it. Only 1,300 have occurred in vaccinated Americans. The top said have been unvaccinated, as if to imply the vaccine was more dangerous.
What?
That's so Daily Mail. Get an editor.
I'm nervous when people say that we're in lockdowns because we're in shutdowns, and I'm nervous when people say that people died of COVID when they died with a comorbidity.
We're not in a shutdown right now, Ian.
Well, over the last year in 2020, we had gone through periods of shutdown, and I heard people say lockdown, lockdown. They like that word, that buzzword.
We did lockdown.
It's a lock. It's like
York,
they want it to be
New
bad.
New York did lockdown.
But there were lots of instances of shutdown that people were calling lockdown. Let's not make it worse than it seems. We don't have to make it seem worse than it is. Saying that people
I don't
died.
understand.
We're phrasing. It's subtle little language twists that people do to control this narrative right now.
You're saying tell people to accept that they're barred from leaving their homes or going to their jobs.
No, but I'm saying if
that's a lockdown.
If an area gets shut down, don't say that it's locked down by lock and key. Businesses aren't open. That doesn't mean you can't walk around outside. So it's not a lockdown state.
Right. Ian, that's called apologizing for authoritarianism.
No, if we say that we have lockdowns and we keep saying it, then the government will put them into place and people will passively let it happen because they're used to hearing
lockdowns.
It. We had shutdowns for the most part.
No, we had
the United
lockdowns.
States. We had maybe had a few instances of things being locked down, but for the most part, the United States was very leniently shut down as opposed to Australia. Massively locked down.
Like you're saying, you're drawing. Where are you drawing the line?
When the police don't let people go outside.
I mean,
they're arresting people for walking around.
That happened in the U.S.
Very, very rarely, though. For the most part,
but we had lockdowns.
There were some instances of it. It was very rare, and I argue it violates the Constitution of the United States.
It's shutdown, lockdown. What's the difference?
It's because if you tell people that we're locked down for all of 2020, then when they actually start locking it down, people will be used to it because they thought it was already happening.
Well, I'll tell you this. Look, man, obviously that Daily Mail story was wrong because it contradicted itself, which is why I always say, talk to your doctor about what's right for you. You know, and there's another good reason, too, because I got a feeling like whatever ends up happening in the long run, people are going to come back and they're going to be like, Tim said X or Y, and I'm not going to be the person who's going to be responsible for your health decision. So by all means, you could be in the comments right now saying Tim is dumb. I would appreciate it. Great, because I don't want anybody putting the responsibility on me for your health decisions.
Yeah.
Nah, Seamus, you go talk to your doctor.
I have a whole bunch. We're buddies.
Seamus
we had
threatened to sue me.
conversations. Exactly.
He was like, I'm going to do everything you say.
I went to my doctor and I had a hidden camera when I was talking to Tim, and I showed it to my doctor. I was like, how much can we get from him? Like, how much money can we get from this guy?
Seamus went to the vitamin.
And he's like, you should have talked to your lawyer. Talk to your lawyer about how much money you can get from Tim Pool after you sue him.
Seamus went into the kitchen where we have all the vitamins, and he just grabbed like C, D, A, multivitamin. Yeah. He's just chugging them, and he's like, it's healthy. Tim said so. And I'm like, no, Seamus, stop.
That's true, yeah.
So here's the interesting thing, though. They say that that half of people. Let me see exactly what they said. They said more than half of unvaccinated Americans believe that they're more dangerous than the virus itself.
Well, that makes sense.
So I'm going to pull up the story. This is from
like 70.
This is from UPMC. University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon University. Researchers identified groups hesitant about COVID-19 vaccine. This is the most fascinating to me. The study says the largest decrease in hesitancy between January and May by education group was in those with a high school education or less. Hesitancy held constant in the most educated group, those with a PhD. By May, PhDs were the most hesitant group. What? While vaccine hesitancy decreased across virtually all racial groups, Black and Pacific Islanders had the largest decreases, joining Hispanics and Asians at having lower vaccine hesitancy than whites in May. Why? I have no answer for that.
Well, the data. I mean, if you listen to, Peak Prosperity, Chris Martinson, if you listen to Brett Weinstein and Pierre Corey.
That's wrong.
They're scientists that just fish data, and the data speaks for itself.
No, it literally doesn't. We had Chris Martinson on the show, and with all due respect, he's a very smart man. He's got a PhD in, I think, in toxicology. Mm-hmm. And when we talked with him, he said, here's 53 studies on ivermectin, and then I Googled it and found a whole bunch more saying the exact opposite. The data doesn't speak for itself.
We'll have to go into it on the after show. There's some studies that I've seen that have just been mind-blowing.
Bro, we literally I pulled up studies, and there's studies that say these treatments do nothing, and there are studies saying they do some things. None of these treatments are FDA approved. The point is the data does not speak for itself.
Well, I disagree. I think this is why PhDs are among the most hesitant, is because it's data heavy. It comes down to the data. I mean, you got to look at what was polio doing to people. It was crippling children. The data was showing that little kids were like losing their ability to walk permanently. That's like screaming data. We haven't seen that kind of data with this. I mean, there's been a lot of illness.
600 and what are we at? 620,000 dead
that had died with COVID. And when they phrase it of COVID, that's kind of a manipulation, because a lot of it is comorbid, and people have 94%. Obesity and they die with like a heart failure, but they had COVID in their system, so it gets logged.
COVID is like he like COVID pulls the pin out and then the train goes off the rails. You know what I mean? So it's like people who may have survived with comorbidities don't when they get
It's
COVID.
tough to say. That's a situation where you don't know what it would have been without it because it didn't have it without
what the data is saying.
Well, you don't know if they hadn't gotten COVID, what would have happened
point
because
is,
they had gotten COVID.
I hear from people all the time. They're like, hey, I read this about that, this, that, or otherwise. And I'm like, I'm going to read that. And then I find conflicting information from like legitimate sources. And I'm like, I can't draw an honest conclusion. Go talk to your doctor. Because when Chris Martinson was here and he said 53 studies, I said, great, let's pull them up. And I pulled them up. And I'm like, that's really fascinating. And then I Googled other studies to see if there was a contradiction. Sure enough, I found like many. And I'm like, I asked him, these studies say the opposite. And he goes, oh, well, that study was bad. And I'm like, how are you going to come to me and tell me this study is good, this study is bad when they're both studies? Okay, I'm a layman. And I can respect him because I think he's a smart guy and he knows more about it than I do. And I can respect Brett Weinstein. But then there are many other doctors that I see writing stories who don't appear overtly political who are saying the inverse.
I suppose it's just I've seen Chris Martinson, Pierre Corey, Brett Weinstein. Brett's not a doctor, not a virologist. He's a biologist, but he's a very smart scientist. Pierre Corey is a virologist. Is Chris Martinson a virologist?
Yeah, but bro, what I'm telling you is if you only watch one thing and then say that must be true, the data doesn't speak for itself when you can pull up contradictory information.
Okay, maybe, yeah, you're right. Data doesn't speak for itself, but I did get this from reputable sources. That's the reason
And I got contradictory information from reputable sources as well.
Which sources?
We pulled them up on the show. You were here.
Can we go right now on this? I remember touching on it. I don't remember who did these studies, who paid these people to do these studies.
You see, that's the problem. When people say, well, your organization is no good because of this, that, or but your organization, I'm like, dude, that means literally nothing.
But the problem is some organizations will do studies specifically to derive a specific result.
And then for political reasons, people make observations or determinations or trust. I try my best to avoid doing that. And so this is what guides most of my work is that if I see some conservative guy come out and say that, you got to buy your gold, and then a Democrat guy comes out and says, you got to buy silver, I'll be like, well, we got two contradictory people giving contradictory advice. Can I find source information to vet which one is better? Hey, I looked it up. Gold's worth more.
So when it comes to these studies, you see conflicting studies. Do you just dismiss them all, or do you go deeper and try and figure out which studies are right or which ones are more accurate?
So the issue is when you look at a study, what can you really determine about it? There's a doctor named Dr. John Smith or whatever his name is. And I'm like, okay, so I can look him up. And then I find a LinkedIn for a guy and I'm like, okay. And I look up, here's his university. And then I find a Dr. Jane Doe and I look her up and I'm like, well, they both disagree with each other. I can't make a determination. Mm-hmm. What am I supposed to tell people if there's conflicting information out there?
Same when they say buy gold, buy silver. You have to kind of do some deep research to figure out which study is legit.
There are people who want to believe one or the other, and they may have reason to. And I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm saying I haven't been able to find anything strong. And so therein lies the big issue. It's why I don't definitively come out and say, you must do X or Y. I say, talk to someone you trust in the medical field, because when I see these things, when I talk to these, like Chris Martinson, he's on the show twice now. I'm like, I pulled up a study that he said was positive for alternate treatments. And then I Googled the study and found another paper that said the methodology was flawed. It was not a good study because of these reasons. Then I pulled up a study saying these alternative treatments were ineffective. And he said to me, oh, but those studies are flawed because they're, and I'm, okay, dude.
Right.
With all due respect.
Was it one of those things are ineffective because we never tested them for efficacy?
No,
they'll do that sometimes.
I'm saying we sat here, we have the episode, it's on timcast.com, where I was like, I can pull up something saying literally what you just said in the other direction.
They would say that about aspartame. They'd say, there's no evidence aspartame has any links to cancer because we never studied aspartame. That's
totally
weird,
irrelevant to what we're talking about.
That's medical logic sometimes.
I'm talking about fact finding and determining, to the best of our abilities, truth. And you can argue that you trust or don't trust a particular political faction or those who advocate for in a certain direction. I don't think that's good enough. I want proof. Now, there's a good reason I think not to trust the media, but we have a big issue now when the CDC comes out and says, here's a list of things. And I'm like, okay, well, I do have a personal bias against government for a lot of reasons. But if I can't disprove it, that puts me in a difficult position.
So why do you think that it's mostly PhD people that are...
That's why I said I have no answer for that.
It's hard to know also because you don't know what their PhDs are in.
That's right. It could be like, I think, who said this before? Was it you were saying like it could be like feminist dance class?
I was going to think it could be like a PhD in lesbian poetry. I have no idea.
Right. So we have no idea. That's why I say it's interesting. But I'm seeing a lot of people highlight that as if that's evidence of something. And I'm like, it's just a group of people. Maybe they're activists who hate Donald Trump because they're in universities.
And how many people was polled here? It was like 2,000 people?
Well, this
or
was I guess it was.
Well, so what you're doing, this is data from people who are saying that they were already against getting the vaccine. It's probably, I mean, it could very well just be the case that if someone has a PhD, their opinion was more likely to be backed up with statistics, again, whether they're ones you would agree with or disagree with in the first place. And so that locks them into it more firmly.
Or they're more likely to be stodgy and stubborn, thinking they're smarter than everybody.
Well, and I think that plays into it as well.
I'm a doctor. You can't change my mind.
And that's exactly part of why I said statistics, whether you would agree with them or disagree with them. I think people with PhDs, people whose brains work more quickly, are more conventionally intelligent, tend to be a bit more prideful, and they're also better at convincing themselves of things.
Here's what I'm saying.
To me, a PhD is just a Twitter check mark in real life.
Right.
I don't really trust it all that much.
But here's what I'm saying. All the information we present, you can take into consideration however you see fit. But if I can't make a determination, I'm not going to make one.
So your point,
I need sources before I come out and say something. And, I get things wrong every so often or jump the gun. It happens because I'm far from perfect. But I try to avoid things if I can't prove it.
your point about studies is interesting because I feel like they do this every other month with dietary stuff. Fats are bad. Fats are good. Use this oil.
Yeah.
Don't use this oil. This is going to kill you. You're going to get cancer from coffee. Coffee is good for your heart. Coffee cures depression for women. What am I supposed to think? So I think that in the end really boils down to one, individual rights, and two, common sense. And like, I don't even know what to tell you. It's not like a whole read the studies thing because you're not going to understand all.
Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.